About a year ago, I walked away from the left. I would have never expected it. For most of my adult life, I've considered myself a progressive, oriented towards social justice, and open-minded. I associated the political right with racism, homophobia, closed-mindedness, and of course, I was against Trump. But around the time of the pandemic lockdown, I started questioning things. I started researching. I started listening to Black and minority conservatives. I started looking at statistics, and my views began to change. The things that I was learning were mind-blowing and surreal. It honestly felt like I had been living in an altered reality, where once you've seen it, there's no turning back. Now, there's something about getting a different perspective on things and recognizing truth that makes you want to share it with as many people as possible, especially those that you care about the most. Now, I'm not going to say that I know every truth, but I have learned some important facts, which I'll share with you in this video, and leave it up to you to draw your own conclusions and to do further research. So I'll put all source links in the description of what I mention in this video. So I'm going to give you a few key facts for each of the following topics, which I believe debunk leftist claims. A few key facts that I hope will be enough to spur you to investigate further. The topics are abortion, systemic racism, COVID, the trans phenomenon, and finally, President Trump. So let's begin with abortion. Now, I learned from a video put out by Live Action called How the Sexual Revolution Hijacked Feminism. I learned the following. But first, let's look at the first claim. Claim number 1, abortion is about the liberation of women. Okay, so how did it start? Let's look at a few key players who were behind the early feminism and abortion movements. Betty Friedan, Alice Paul, Susan B. Anthony, and the suffragettes actually believed that abortion was wrong and a sign of female oppression often used by men to control women. Betty Friedan, leader of the National Organization for Women, had a vision for women's equality that excluded abortion. She said, "You want a feminism that includes women who have children and want children because that's the majority of women." Later, Betty Friedan wrote her second book called The Second Stage, in which she expressed regrets that the feminist movement had demonized the family. It was actually two men, Larry Lader and Bernard Nathanson, who took over the women's movement. Their aim was to promote and legalize abortion across America. They founded NARAL, the National Abortion and Reproductive Rights Action League. Larry Lader's goal centered around population control and upsetting sexual morality. His book, Abortion, was influential in the Roe v. Wade decision. Now, Bernard Nathanson later left NARAL, converted to Catholicism, and became a pro-life activist. He produced one of the most impactful anti-abortion films called The Silent Scream, which we'll get to in a moment. So it's interesting to note how these important players in the abortion movement had a change of heart and left the movement. But let's go further back. Historically, abortion has been practiced since ancient times by civilizations such as ancient China, ancient India, ancient Egypt, and the Roman Empire. Some ancient pagan religions engaged in child sacrifice to their gods. Meanwhile, some ancient physicians were against the practice of abortion, believing that the Hippocratic oath to first do no harm prohibited it. Wikipedia states that in 1920, Soviet Russia became the first country to legalize abortion after Lenin insisted that no woman be forced to give birth. Now, I find it interesting to note that this is a rallying cry that we've heard from the pro-choice feminists. They claim that the political right want forced birth. They say, why should a woman be forced to give birth when a man doesn't have to? And it's interesting to make the connection of where this idea originates with Lenin in communist Russia. Now, technically speaking, no one forces anyone to give birth. And regulating or banning a medical procedure does not equate to having power or control over a woman's body. It's an illogical argument. Birth is the final natural stage of pregnancy. No one, not the government, not the pro-lifers, force birth on anyone or control women's bodies. Birth is a natural consequence of getting pregnant. It happens unless you prevent it, yes, but it's a natural bodily function. You could say, I guess, that your body is forcing you to give birth, but not another person or an institution. So let's go back to Lenin in Soviet Russia again, where abortion was first legalized. Vladimir Lenin was the first and founding head of government of Soviet Russia from 1917 to 1924, and of the Soviet Union from 1922 to 1924. Under his administration, Russia and later the Soviet Union became a one-party socialist state governed by the Communist Party. Under Lenin's Bolshevik government, opponents were suppressed in the Red Terror, a violent campaign administered by the state security services. Tens of thousands were killed or interned in concentration camps. The Red Terror sought to eliminate political dissent, opposition, and any other threat to Bolshevik power. Wikipedia states that the most reliable estimations for the number of executions in total put the number at about 100,000. Next, Iceland in 1935 and Sweden in 1938 would follow suit to legalize certain or all forms of abortion. In Nazi Germany in 1935, a law permitted abortions for those deemed hereditarily ill, while women considered of German stock were specifically prohibited from having abortions. In Japan, abortion was first legalized by the 1948 Eugenics Protection Law, meant to prevent the births of inferior humans. Let's consider Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood. A New York Times article reported that, quote, Planned Parenthood of Greater New York will remove the name of Margaret Sanger, a founder of the national organization, from its Manhattan health clinic because of her harmful connections to the eugenics movement. Miss Sanger, a public health nurse who opened the first birth control clinic in the United States in Brooklyn in 1916, has long been lauded as a feminist icon and reproductive rights pioneer. But her legacy also includes supporting eugenics, a discredited belief in improving the human race through selective breeding, often targeted at poor people, those with disabilities, immigrants, and people of color. Margaret Sanger stated in an article that she wrote in 1921, quote, "The most urgent problem today is how to limit and discourage the over-fertility of the mentally and physically defective." So let's go back to the claim. Abortion is about women's liberation. It was eugenics and population control associated with the communism that was responsible for mass killings that underlie the abortion movement. And then there's the money. Abortion is a highly profitable business. According to Planned Parenthood's 2019 to 2020 annual report, quote, Planned Parenthood reported $1.6 billion in income and over $2 billion in net assets, an increase from the previous report. Planned Parenthood, despite being a nonprofit, had an excess of total revenue over total expenses of $69.7 million. In 2018 to 2019, abortions made up 96.4% of Planned Parenthood's pregnancy resolution services, while prenatal services, miscarriage, care, and adoption referrals accounted for only 2.3%, 0.6%, and 0.7%, respectively. Let's look at the second claim. It's just a clump of cells. For me, even while I was on the left, this really wasn't the argument. Even then, I recognized that pregnancy, to terminate a pregnancy, infers with child. For me, I knew it was a child, a human life, but that wasn't the argument that I was making, which is odd to me, reflecting back on my thinking now. So I believed that it was a child, but that the woman should still have a right to euthanize her child if that was her choice. I had believed that the woman's body, the woman's choice, took precedence over the child's life. And it sounds insane to me now. And I used to subscribe to the idea that abortion could be a compassionate act in certain circumstances, akin to euthanasia. Of course, this perspective wouldn't account for those abortions where the child isn't diseased, but is simply unwanted, inconvenient, or impractical. My views have since changed. In the film, The Silent Scream, we get an ultrasound view of a live D&E abortion procedure. Upon watching, it's clear that the child in the womb can feel pain and anxiety as the child recoils away from the abortion instrument, reaching to dismember the child. It's devastating to watch, but it's important to see what you're standing behind, as horrific and brutal as it is. According to science, life begins at the moment of sperm-egg fusion or fertilization, that from the moment of fertilization, the child's genetic makeup is already complete. Its sex has been determined, along with height and hair, eye, and skin color. You can see medical textbooks such as The Developing Human, Clinically Oriented Embryology 7th edition by Keith L. Moore, and Langman's Medical Embryology 10th edition by T.W. Sadler. So the claim, it's just a clump of cells. Whether zygote, embryo, or fetus, we are talking about a human life in its earliest stages of development. OBGYNs consider both the mother and the fetus to be patients in their care, two separate patients. Let's look at the third claim. Abortion saves women's lives. Abortion is healthcare. In reality, life-saving emergency procedures that are performed on pregnant women are not abortion procedures. They're emergency procedures on women experiencing miscarriage. The babies in these cases are either usually already dead or dying. They're not unwanted. So what about the women's lives abortion saves because of so-called back alley abortions? To this, I ask this question. Is it another person's responsibility to prevent another from acts of violence against themselves? If a person attempts suicide or engages in self-harm, for example, who's responsible for that? Is it their family, medical professionals, or the government? Who pulled the trigger? This may sound unsympathetic. My point is that we all have individual responsibility for our own actions. It's not anyone else's responsibility or job to save me from myself. And shouldn't the protection of innocent children always come first? So what about when it's a young child who is raped and becomes pregnant? Shouldn't they be protected? Shouldn't they have the option to choose abortion? Well, according to healthresearchfunding.org, fewer than 1% of abortions occur due to rape or incest. Up to 85% of women who become pregnant due to rape or incest choose to have their children. And I have to ask, why is the pregnant child given more consideration than the child in the womb? Shouldn't both children in this case be protected? Abortions from rape and incest are rare. So who then is having abortions? According to the CDC, women in their 20s accounted for the majority of abortions in 2020, and unmarried women accounted for 86% of abortions. Furthermore, in Poland, they banned abortion in 1993. Their maternal deaths went from 80 in 1991 to just 33 by 1996. That's over a 50% fall in just 5 years. So the claim that abortion saves women's lives, protecting mothers and babies saves their lives. And abortion is healthcare. Abortion ends a pregnancy through the killing of an unborn child. There is no treatment or prevention of disease, therefore it's not healthcare. Let's look at the fourth and final claim. Abortion regret is rare. Well, websites like Silent No More and Abortion Changes You debunk this claim. You can also listen to many stories on YouTube of women who regret their abortions. Then there are stories of regret from clinicians and abortionists who left the abortion industry. I encourage you to hear their stories to get an inside view of the industry. What I took away from hearing these courageous stories was a sense of how these women enter the industry because they have a heart for women's health and then wind up coming to realize how dehumanizing the industry is. The way the clinicians and administrative staff have to speak about the unborn to create that sense of distance and sensitivity. I remember how they discussed high rates of drug addiction, alcoholism, and anxiety among abortion workers' staff. They talk about the quotas Planned Parenthood sets for abortions. There's a monetary incentive to encourage abortion versus educating on all options for pregnant women. Then I came across a memorial for the unborn, which again makes evident that there is much remorse, trauma, and heartbreak surrounding abortion for many who have chosen this option. There are letters to the unborn left behind from not just mothers, but fathers, siblings, and other family members. Listening to the stories of women who regretted their abortions, it becomes clear the kinds of patterns that most commonly lead to a woman choosing abortion. Whether abandonment by the partner, rejection by family, or lack of material resources. Hence, why pregnancy centers are important sources of support and assistance for so many pregnant women. They often offer basic supplies, counseling, mentoring, employment resources, and parenting education. And what we've seen is pro-choice activists targeting these sources of support for women while claiming to stand for women's rights. It's been reported that over 70 pro-life facilities have been attacked or firebombed by violent pro-choice and Antifa activists. So these are the claims and these are the facts that I wanted to share with you. I thank you for watching, and hopefully you'll continue to do further research. Thank you for watching, and if you appreciated this message, please like and subscribe, and I will continue to discuss the other topics in the next videos. Take care.